Hello, everyone. Welcome to our lunchtime session. Lunchtime if you're on the East Coast, I guess. Breakfast, West Coast, and coffee break for everybody else. Of CME Palooza, I am Derek Warnick, your co-producer for this particular session. Let me bring up the slides so everyone can see. Our session today is sponsored by the generous contribution from Academic CME. The multi-day medical education program, the Rationale for longer-term courses, moderated by Tim Hayes, president of Academic CME. But before we do that, I need to go over to my slides so I can advance them. Okay, the reading of our sponsors, which everyone always enjoys. Our gold sponsor, as I already said, Academic CME. Our silver sponsors, ASIM, Creative Educational Concepts, and Prova Education. And our bronze sponsors, Answers in CME, ACHL, Catalyst Medical Education, Catamount Medical Education, Clinical Care Options, CMEology, Global Academy for Medical Education, Global Education Group, Helio Education Lab, Integritas, Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, Primary Care Network, PVI, RedMedEd, RMEI Medical Education, which we just realized that we have their old logo, and we apologize. I was supposed to swap it out before the session, and I couldn't get to it. So next time, I promise I'll have the next one up for the next session. And Thistle Editorial, and lastly but not least, Vindico Medical Education. As always, there are 3 ways that you can ask questions. That is 3. You can use the ASIM text line to send in a question, 267-6660-CME. You can also click on the Google Slides link, which is found on the live page. I am Derek, so please click on the link that is beside my name. It's right above the video that you're currently watching. And you can also tweet your question using the CME Palooza hashtag. I'll be monitoring all those different channels, so you can use any of them that you choose, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can. And the very last slide from me is our speaker disclosure slide. Any opinions, discussions, and/or conclusions expressed are our own and do not represent an endorsement by or position of our employer, its parent company, or affiliates. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Tim. Tim, take it away.
Thank you, Derek. I would like to thank you and Scott for allowing us this opportunity. And I want to welcome the entire CME Palooza team. I've been listening all day, and I've learned a lot from this morning's presentations and have taken notes. And I think you've put together a great program.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce my team, and then we'll get started. So I'm going to go in alphabetic order. So on this team, we have Lynn Aniel, who is Senior Manager, Scientific Education at Celgene. We'll say hello.
Hi, everyone.
And then Kim Chernley, who is President of K&B HealthWorks. Kim.
Hi, everyone.
And Dr. Honor Meyer, Director of the Office of CME at Temple University School of Medicine.
Hello.
Now, I know you may think it's odd that Arnie and I seem to be sitting together on this screen, and we are sharing the same desk, which we could explain to you in private some other time.
Oh, God.
And I'm going to, Rashida from, she's the Associate Director of Business Development Program, Compass Management and Consulting.
Hi.
How you doing? So and I'm very appreciative of our team here. So what our goal today is to, it's very common for a lot of the medical education work that we all do to be shorter programs. Maybe 1 hour is kind of a standard amount of time. Even satellite symposia at meetings are up to 2 hours. And there's certainly a call that with the epidemic of attention deficit problems and people wanting everything fast food, fast oil change, they want to get an entire medical education in around 10, 20-minute episodes. So while I appreciate that, I would like to take time out to discuss the longer-term program, which is a little less common, but I think has a very valuable place in CME. The team of presenters that I have that you will hear from today all have a unique experience with the longer-term programs, and I think it'll be very informative. So I'm going to just do an introduction, and then we'll move on to the other crew. So the characteristics, so I just want to make some general terms of what we're talking about. So for longer term with CME, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm generally talking about live because they're multi-day. I'm certainly, it could be online that people would take it over time, but I'm more focused on the live classroom style learner course. We call it a course rather than an activity. It's usually focused on one disease state, update on, Parkinson's disease, update on the dyslipidemia, such like that, or even maybe a specialty update for primary care, update for a certain thing. But it's usually focused, and the goal is to advance somebody's practice. So anybody that would take a long-term CME course, they're making an investment. They are taking they're making a commitment to take a lot of time out of their day, out of their practice, and they're hoping to get a lot out of it. They're gonna really want to advance their practice to a different level. I always consider it like developing an expertise in the area. And usually it's certainly the same audience over multiple days. So that's, you'll hear more about this later, but that's generally what I'm talking about. And on the next slide, we go into the rationale. So when you are going to do a program like this, which disease states make sense? Which specialties benefit? It's certainly just from the top of it, if you have a rare disease or something that's not very active in the research field, I don't think it would fit a longer term program. But major diseases that cause a substantial disease burden that have become complex in pathophysiology, where thanks to all the research and development, they're learning new targets and understanding the disease differently. There's a growing body of emerging data to discuss and interpret. And that data, whenever you have the increase in data, that changes your clinical decision making. And usually the more data you have, the more you learn about the pathophysiology, the more complicated clinical decision making is. And with the transition over this last decade or so to a personalized medicine, individualized medicine, not necessarily a one size fits all, but trying to get better outcomes in patient care by using genomic information and targeted therapies, as you see in many subspecialties. That also has made the clinical decision making more difficult. So in addition, it has become more clear how important the interprofessional team is. The role and the involvement of the interprofessional team has always been there, but in CME, we have to recognize that if we don't include all of those aspects, we're not going to be able to deliver what we learn. So the value, and this is up for discussion with the colleagues that are going to follow me. So where are the values? It's a more in-depth. It's not just a shorter update. If you want to give somebody just an update on a phase 3 trial or some information or newer guidelines, maybe that can be a shorter program. But that's not what we're talking about. Also, with more time, you can address more learning objectives. And in addition, over a longer day, if you have a day, multi-day, you can also ask a lot of questions, whether you use an iPad technology, ARS, and you can assess how are the learners doing. And you have time on the second day or subsequent days then to address maybe areas you missed that you measured on the previous day. Or you can even ask the learners, are there any things that you are confused about from day one? And on a multi-day course, you have an agile content. With that in mind, I have some recommendations just from a practical point of view from the longer term programs that academic CME has been involved in. If you can limit the size of the class. So, we always in CME want to reach large numbers. Makes sense. You do all this work on developing content. It's everybody's desire for every clinician to see your content. But in a classroom, just like when you were all in your own professional education, sometimes the bigger classroom changes the learning environment. So you have to think about what is the ideal classroom size? What's the ideal faculty to student ratio? I would say that a high faculty to student ratio makes for a better program. If you're going to keep people for a couple of days, it needs to be interactive. So you need technology, and they need to be able to take notes, save slides, ask questions, and one needs to be able to do that electronically at their seat, not by coming up to a microphone, disrupting things. I also recommend the benefit of panels. I've been a big advocate of the faculty panel. I like the combination where you would have maybe a didactic presentation giving some data, and then having the panel to discuss the data and see how to apply it to practice. Also, the panels is a really good environment for the Q&A part. The other thing is you do have to be respectful of the learner's time. You have to go at a proper pace and to give them a certain amount of breaks and such, and force ourselves, all of us in the industry, force ourselves to leave proper time for Q&A. So many times there's a presentation that goes on and you'll end it like, oh, we have 5 minutes now to do a Q&A, and that's not really good. So those are some recommendations I had. So that is, I presented that as a form of an introduction of what we're going to discuss today. And then now we're going to get to the intelligent part of the program. And, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Meyer, who has a lot of experience because he's been around a long time.
Thanks. Appreciate it. If you can advance. When I first spoke to Tim about this presentation, he asked for various things. So we threw out some ideas related to the multi-day program. We've been running a multi-day family medicine review course at our Temple University School of Medicine for 43 years, 2 times a year. So I think we have some experience in running this course. And I just shot out a couple of things that I think to consider. Why are you doing this length of course? What kind of target audience do you have? For us, we deal with the family medicine specialty. So we have to be sensitive to the needs of the family practitioners. Like any good CME, things start with the target audience, and you need to sort of to reflect upon this with a greater description in your typical one and done sort of presentation meeting, because if you don't have a clear description of your target audience, you won't know where they're going. Now, in family medicine, family and community medicine, and primary care medicine, we've had a shift over the last couple of years with nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and other healthcare providers taking a greater role in primary care medicine. We've had to change how we reflect on our target audience. Then I'd say, like any good CME program, you need to really have a foundation in the ACCME essentials: needs assessment, gap analysis, solid objectives, because otherwise you could float around. Our program, it's a 6-day program from early in the morning to late at night, and you could float around, and if you don't have the proper needs assessment, you don't know where you're headed and what to do. And one of the great things about having done a program for 43 years is we have a comprehensive evaluation which sort of feeds into a proper needs assessment and gap analysis. We have a captive audience. At one time we had an audience of almost 800 family practitioners, and that is a set group of captive audience for good needs assessment. So what do you expect to get out of this? You expect to have a comprehensive review in our case. This isn't going to be just a diabetes lecture or a heart failure lecture, but a comprehensive clinical review of medicine over, in our case, 6 days. So the facts, the length, we have a 6-day program. We have about 108 faculty. We have all kinds of different learners, but our predominant learner group is physicians over the age of 45, between 45 and 70. That goes with a learner style related to a longer course. Remember, multi-day courses do cater to physicians who learn in a particular way. You're not going to get a 70-year-old physician who sit and do podcasts all day. It's just not part of their DNA. We are able, because we have such a large group of physicians, to get solid outcomes, which we'll talk about, and good feedback from our attendees. Advance it, please.
That's your Tim Apple. He was older.
Oh, okay. Well, here's the case study of the 43rd, what I consider this year. We're in the middle of the 43rd semi-annual. We do it in the fall and the spring. And one of the key foundations to this course is strong leaderships. We have probably one of the most respected family medicine residency directors in perhaps history, Nikita Servanos, who built one of the best programs in partnership with Lancaster General Health. So it starts with a foundation of a great course director. And of course, great faculty, strong faculty. I'm very proud of our Temple faculty and what they have done and how they help shape the program. Outstanding content that's evidence-based with good, strong clinical information. And it's important to note for our program how we present it in bite-sized 20-minute chunks. So someone looking for a comprehensive clinical review can get that comprehensive clinical review in 6 days and cover most of the family medicine related topics. Of course, you can't discount, as much as the CME industry would love to just sort of poo-poo everything related to hospitality, you can't discount hospitality, good food service, and comfort. If you don't have comfort, you don't have the proper learning environment so that someone can entrench themselves and really get all they can out of the great content being presented by the terrific faculty. And I think probably last but not least, my points to be considered is time sensitivity in terms of time management. Our program runs on clock. We do not deviate. If someone's going over a minute, we're going to give them the hook. We want that program to run on schedule, to make sure that it's right. And we have received feedback over 43 years indicating that is one of the prime positive things that attendees like, that the program is managed, that it's efficient, that they go from presentations directly to food service and back. Advance the slide, please. There's a balance with large programs. Our program is not commercially supported. This is a tough thing in modern CME environment. We're able to do it on tuition alone. We've gotten large crowds and we've been blessed with it. We have in the past solicited grants related to the program, but unfortunately, many years ago, many of our colleagues in the CME industry sort of went on a bashing spree for review courses, and I'll tell you that's to this day extremely disappointing to me. I sort of see this multi-day course. It's almost like an old Rodney Dangerfield routine. We get no respect, no respect at all. I mean, we just don't get to do that we should have for CME programs, and we have limited exhibitors, only book people, some CD-ROM and educational exhibitors, and comfort exhibitors such as people who sell clinical shoes and things like that. But we don't have pharmaceutical support related exhibitors. This is because of limited interest. The pharmaceutical industry has had limited interest in this, so we gave up on this many years ago because what we found was those who did come and exhibited were perceived by attendees in a somewhat negative way, in the fact that they perceived if it was a single company XYZ, they thought that XYZ, for their small contribution in terms of exhibitor, no matter how much we appreciated it, was supporting the entire program, which is certainly not true. So we just made the conscious decision to do away with that type of exhibitor support. Next slide, please. Marketing for a large program is very challenging. It's a diverse field. We mail to all the complete United States for family practitioners. We used to also include primary care internists. It's a challenge. People have challenges attending long courses, and that's one of the dilemmas. No matter how great a course you have, can someone break away for 4, 5, 6 days? So we've gone through the typical mailing, brochures, postcards, personalized mailings. We do have some email blasts, although I must confess to you that the email marketing campaigns have been somewhat disappointing. We've embarked on a social media campaign, but to tell you the truth, our target audience being sort of 45 to 70 physicians overwhelmingly probably isn't the target for social media. But we're developing that, and we're also trying to find new ways of finding new markets in terms of younger physicians or recent residency graduates. And of course, we have residency directors in family and community medicine, primary care, internal medicine, and alumni throughout the country. Next slide. Logistics is extremely important to any program, and I can't help but tell you, I know we're not supposed to talk, it's verboten to talk about coffee, but without coffee, the week-long program. So I put the statement: coffee, more coffee.
You can talk about coffee all you want to on this. Trust me.
I'm glad you endorsed that, Derek.
Yeah.
But I tell you,
we need more coffee talk, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Simple things like, the fact that it's not a party, but we don't want participants to be miserable. We want the catering to be good, the food to be good. The box lunch.
Do you do lattes and stuff as well?
No lattes. No lattes.
Just check it.
All right. You have to carefully monitor room temperature and make sure that the room is conducive to learning. Make sure that the learning is the focus and not a distraction. I think one of the things that is frequently happens in very large programs with huge exhibit halls and things like that is, you had enough with diabetes, you had enough with heart failure. Let me get out of here and see what the folks in the exhibit hall are doing. And that can be distracting and have an impact on learning. We want to minimize the impact on learning and maximize the kind of information that they can absorb. Now, we know from learning research that person can only absorb so much. You're a sponge and you can just only soak so much in. But we have found that because of the flow of the program, and the management of the program, going from breakfast to lectures to lunch, et cetera, we allow that collegial discussion that sort of drives learning home. So that's very important. Next slide. So outcomes, we've done 43 years of pre and post tests. We have perceptual data, which is very positive, and we have post-impact analysis from 90-day feedback, which we get a lot of good, solid clinical information. You'd be surprised how many of a lot of our docs really find that they surprise themselves and give anecdotal information. We've been doing some very interesting, and we've published some information on narrative medicine and building a narrative related to it, and building a learning portfolio related to it. And I think we've done some interesting things, and the diversity of topics related to multi-day programs allows us the flexibility to do that.
And Arnie, I know we're sensitive on time, but I'm going to ask a couple quick questions. Do you get to look at the pre-post test data over several years to look back and see are there any trends?
Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, we did some analysis of various topics within the thing. For instance, typical topics, what I consider typical topics, like diabetes, heart failure, hypertension, coronary artery disease, topics like that, to see whether there was a benchmarking and things. And we did find that interestingly enough, folks who had attended on multiple sequential years actually had marketed improvement in what I consider to be big topic issues in primary care medicine. So it's incredible how some of the docs that come from the Midwest and are sort of from farm country who come year after year after year, and we have some folks who have attended for 30 plus straight years, can demonstrate that they have this repetitive learning process from that thing. So that's a great question, Tim, because I think that this is something that also is greatly missed in a lot of CME that goes on. So
yeah, it's interesting because they're investing time because it's a week-long course, but then they're also making an annual commitment to keep up current. And it's funny, not funny, but it's very interesting that you see the data that supports that.
Absolutely.
And the second question I have, and we're very time sensitive, we need to move on, but your 90-day feedback, which we all are very interested in the whole CME world here. What percent, so when they take a longer term course, about what percentage of your learners participate in the long-term feedback, the 90-day?
I would say, if I had to take a stab at that, I would say somewhere in the 35 to 40%.
That's a lot.
Yeah, no, about 35 to 40% say that we can contact them in 90 days. Not everyone necessarily supplies data. And of those who supply data, the richness of the data is sometimes questionable after 90 days. A lot of, yeah, sure, I did this, I dosed this a little different. Okay, fine. But not necessarily a lot of what I consider to be something you can hang your hat on. Now, I'll tell you, on an individual basis, I think we get a lot of very tangible outcomes from folks who are interested in building learning portfolios, and they identify specific topics and subject matters within the coverage of the course, perhaps something that's in an evening 2.5-hour workshop that they specialized in. We might have a workshop on hypertension, and they have 80% of their patients have some sort of form of hypertension, and therefore they submit data related to that. Now, that's few and far between. I don't want to present that as something that's as massive, wonderful outcomes data. I would say it's anecdotal. But it's valuable in our planning process and going back to needs assessment and other things when you're assessing those gaps as you do. And by the way, in terms of future development, one of the reasons we wanted to really focus on a lot of this gap analysis has to do with the potential for bringing the pharmaceutical industry into this, because they're interested in a greater, larger population, which we have access to in this kind of program. Next.
So that's rich. So your 90-day information, that's rich information. That's valuable.
I think it's good. I mean, when you say rich, you have to qualify that a little bit. I think it's good information. I think that if you were a stickler for what I consider to be psychometric standards, I think you might find that there might be some challenges to it. But I think in terms of the development of the actual program, I think it's valuable information, and certainly related to giving course feedback to course directors, very, very valuable. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up, but what I'm going to wrap up in saying is, what is the most overlooked and understated underestimated thing in CME? And if there was an audience in this thing, they would say what, Derek?
Teaching.
Teaching, I tell you. The very most underestimated thing is the power of a great teacher. And I'll tell you something. One of the things that I think a lot of the Enduring Materials and other initiatives related to what I consider modern CME, or CME that is cutting edge in technology orientation, discounts the teaching dynamic. And I think that one of the things that multi-day courses can do is, when people present, especially faculty who say come from Temple and present over the course of several days, people think of questions related to their Monday lecture and then see them on Thursday afternoon and revisit certain topics. Perhaps they went into clinic and said, I had a patient that did this. And then they see them afterwards. So there's an opportunity to do the type of direct learning that we really are looking for. Can you do that in other circumstances? Maybe you can. Maybe you can design it this way. But I find that multi-day programs lend itself to this interaction, and again, give great foundation for a master teacher.
All right, thank you. That was a lot of experience and a lot of insight, and very important. Amina's going to straighten all this out with her extensive experience and point of view, and we're going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm a fundraiser and program developer for a company called Compass Management Consulting. We actually have over a dozen medical association clients, and almost all of them, if not all of them, utilize this longer form 3 to 4 day CME conference. Conversely, to Temple, almost all of them do rely on support from industry to make those things happen. Today, I'm going to go through a 4-day CME conference example for all of you that is a little bit different than what Arnie just went through. Derek, next slide. So this client in particular actually holds 3 live conferences per year, but this one in particular, our sessions, is their largest. We have about 500 attendees, and that covers the whole healthcare team. So physicians, nurses, pharmacists, PAs, and dietitians. And we offer 18.25 credit hours for that course in 2018. It's led by 40 faculty. They're all world-renowned. And again, they are all of different disciplines to mirror the attendee base. And we all of our sessions cover about 26 learning objectives. We also include a digital enduring activity, which helped us, in this particular case, reach over 4,000 more unique learners. Next slide, please. So when you're planning these longer form conferences, you have to answer one key question, and that is, why are they going to come to your conference versus getting sometimes free education online and not have to leave practice time for as long, not leave their families, etc. So the answer for us is knowing that our attendees really want to hear everything first. They want to be the first ones to watch a late-breaking clinical trial data come out. They want to see the latest methods that are discussed by the experts first. They really want to be ahead of the game, and they want to go back to their practices and their institutions and say, I know this information, I can now help educate my group. We facilitate a great feeling of camaraderie with a lot of time for meeting with colleagues and networking with experts. We try to really make sure that we have a nice mix of all those rising stars and those well-known thought leaders. We also know that our attendees come to us, and all of you guys, for the live and interactive experience. It's the reason why we all go see action and horror films in the movies. We want to experience something in a group, seeing our peers taking the same experience, and then be able to discuss it later with our peers. Next slide, Derek. So at this particular session, we had a live presenter debate. We opened the show with this 5-person debate that you see here. We had a presidential debate style moderator table, and those 2 moderators led the experts. Each debater pitched their case to their audience. So they were really speaking to the audience. They were pitching their case for this in this particular topic. And the audience actually used an audience response system to vote on which presenter they felt was most effective. And so what we saw live was an audience who just loved watching the banter between our experts. There was a lot of laughter, engagement, and dialogue between themselves during Q&A with the experts. And the audience was just in an uproar. It was not your typical silent lecture. People are on the computers. They were all very engaged. Some were standing, they were clapping. And so really that kind of energy is what helped fuel the next 4 days of our conference. Next slide, please. So we also include abstracts, and we have these e-posters, and this is actually a photo of our real hall we had last year in Vegas. We have about 100 abstracts from young and some really experienced researchers. And, you know, what we're trying to do is show and really encourage research in this field. So someone who is a newbie, who this is their first time in practice, maybe they're still a fellow in training, they have their abstract on display next to the experts, and people can stand around, watch, listen to Q&A, and again, be the first people who get to get that data, and they're with their peers. Next slide. So as you all know, and as I think Arnie mentioned in his presentation, funding support is on a definite decline in some areas for live conferences. To show value, you really have to demonstrate a couple things. One is reach, measuring of changes in competence and performance, and then really trying to get user level data. When we're measuring all these things, I think anyone who's in industry, I'm sure, feels the same way. The main objective that we all have across all of our dozen association clients is to really decrease mortality, improve patient care, and make more informed providers. And so we have to be able to actually measure that and show that what we're doing is effective. Next slide. So in this example of these sessions, we had about 441 attendees. And this is kind of the attendee by region breakdown. We also had 9 other countries who attended. I'm showing you this to show you in stark contrast to what we had for our digital enduring activity. So next slide, Derek. So if you see here, I mean, we had the Southeast was not very well represented at our Vegas meeting for obvious reasons, right? But on this digital enduring activity, they really blew them out of the water. They were the most well-represented region. And so what we're able to show is that even though we maybe couldn't capture the whole country in a more equal sense at our live meeting, we took that same content, we captured the video content from our opening session, we hosted it with an online distribution partner, and we were able to capture people who were not able to attend for whatever reason, whether it's because it's far, that we all know how flights to the West Coast are, and so we were able to get a new kind of audience and really expand the reach of our education. Next slide. So as far as, one of our main goals always for every activity we do, whether it's these longer form conferences or an online activity, we want to measure changes in competence and performance. And when I say performance for our particular case, I mean self-reported changes in performance. So we do pre and post test session quizzes. Historically, we always would do a pre-test at the beginning of a 4-day conference and then, post-test after. And what we found was that the ends were very different for both sample sizes. We had, lower knowledge retention, and by making it instead multiple pre and post-test quizzes after each 2-hour session, we were able to better hope that the same people answering our pre were answering our post as well. And really try to get that user level data where we know that one keypad that we use is really capturing the answer from the same person in pre and in post. We also like that we can reinforce the knowledge they're getting at the time of learning. We also do a post-program evaluation. I'm sure everyone does this. Ours is fairly standard, but we do include some clinical questions from our pre and post-test quizzes to kind of, again, measure those changes in competence and, again, reinforce learning when we can. We do a 6-week follow-up versus a 90-day follow-up like Temple does. We do that because we think that, for us, for changes to actually occur, 6 weeks for us is a minimum, but if we wait much longer, the response rate's even lower. Tim, you were asking Arnie about response rates. Ours is actually much lower.
Can I ask you that? Even if you could take a minute, I know time sensitive. Could you tell a little bit more about the survey? Is it strictly survey questions, or do you even put in some post knowledge or competence questions? Or anyway, just elaborate a little bit. Thanks, Amanda.
We do always include your standard clinical questions that are pulled out. So we always have some knowledge-based questions that probably are answered without using a case vignette. But for these 6-week follow-up surveys, we do include those clinical competence learning objective questions. And we also have open text fields. And I know it's a huge staff burden for people to be able to analyze those open text fields responses, but we do think it's really important to ask someone, what have you actually changed? And in our post-program evaluation, we ask them to commit that they're going to make changes in practice. And we always get a very good response rate. Usually about 80 to 90% of people claim credit. And they usually respond highly that they have learned something that will change their practice. And the
success rate on the getting that many answers, get that many follow-ups.
Yeah, well, so
learners or
evaluation, it's a requirement. We make them take it to claim credit, and for whatever reason, our membership is very passionate, and we have our moderators throughout the entire 4-day course. Every day, they remind people that their rich data, their thoughtful responses, not just Christmas treeing a survey, helps us provide better education. So if they want to come again next year and have an even better conference, it's important. And so having our experts on stage really hitting home that it's important for them to respond and respond thoughtfully has really helped our response rate go up.
So to be fair for them to get the CME credit, filling out this survey is part of their duty.
And we are now piloting several different methods for kind of an incentive program to help increase our response rate for that 6-week follow-up survey as well. So
we are dealing with lipaholics, so that's
right.
Unusual. They have their own addiction drug.
Right.
That's interesting, though. Yeah, go ahead. That's great.
So actually, for those pre and post test quizzes, we use a traditional audience response system. The pro for us is it's cost effective. We are in sometimes those hotel ballrooms that don't have strong cellular or Wi-Fi service. They're easy to use. Arnie, you mentioned your population is on the older range. Ours is also, but we also have that younger population. But using these keypads ensure that every age group can use them and they'll be okay. And they're also not distracting to learners. The con is that it's hard to capture that user level data, and we all know why. And you can't measure engagement. So we know some systems like Array, you can really measure how many slides they're going through, if they're taking notes, how much they maybe sign out of the program and come back in. But the problem is that they're very expensive. We cannot afford them. And then, it is somewhat of a distraction of people going through, flipping ahead the slides, going to the next lecture. So there's definite pros and cons to this, but you know, for the last several years, we've been using this system. So, Derek, I think that's it for me. Yep.
Well, Amina, that was great and very informative, and I think it's interesting so far for the CME Palooza audience that we have a topic of the extended medical education program, and you really got three kind of very different points of view. Fortunately, and we are like, this is why Lynn is here, the voice of reason, give an intelligent distillation of what do you think about all this stuff from your point of view, from your vantage point. You have the unique pleasure of looking at hundreds and probably thousands of grants, and sitting with committees and looking at the value of education, and you have a big responsibility. So we're interested in your thoughts on this.
Lynn,
you might be muted. We're not hearing
you. Yes. So before
there you are. Now we hear you.
I do want everyone to know that my comments are really not representative of Celgene, but more so my own opinion. So I do want to provide that, up front to everyone. But I think this is interesting, from an industry supporter. I always feel like when I'm going through a lot of proposals, and even as a clinician, as a pharmacist, the multi-day education platform, it just depends, really. Like, what is really the overall goal of why we're trying to really offer a 1 day versus a 3 day or a 5 day course? So I think for me, I'm looking at more so, is it really more for maintenance of certification? Is it more professionalism? Are we looking just to, provide information? Or really we want to hone in a specialty area where we want to really, like Arnie mentioned earlier, advance in our practice, you understand? So I personally am thinking more about that learner, especially if I'm looking at a grant that wants to support 5 day courses. I'm just thinking about how will that impact their care? Would it really make a big difference at the end of the day? Can you see a clinician like a dermatologist or rheumatologist or a physician see that risk of, in some ways it's very hard to them for learners to actually leave a 2 day courses, let alone a 5 day course. Will they really want to take that risk and say, I'm going to be away from my practice, from my patient, or from my pharmacy for 5 days just to get this advanced training versus let me get snippets? Is it easier to actually go to an advanced course 2 days before a conference, and I know they've got that training and they're going to come back and implement with that training versus is it really advantageous for me to support a program that covers a 5 day course, and I'm not sure how much of that knowledge will really be retained and implemented when they return back to their practice, So I hope that answers the question. I feel like it's one of those, like, I'm just juggling a lot of questions in my mind. I'm thinking about it as a learner, also at the same time as a clinician, but what really makes sense. And then at the same time, thinking about the agenda, like, does the agenda really hit home for me where I'm thinking, is it going to provide that education that really will make that impact? Because at the end of the day, we as, an educational specialist, our ultimate goal is really to make sure we do improve patient care. We are trying to reduce mortality. We are trying to advance practice with education, bridge that practice, the gaps that we do see in terms of education and practice and education, really.
So I hear you again, the outcomes, which has been a big topic today. At the beginning with LB. I'm hearing that you would like to see some data on how this does affect the learner compared to the shorter programs.
Yes, I do, because I think it's interesting, like for, as you mentioned, you tie certifications to a 6-week post-survey, and that's interesting. But I guess one of the things I did not hear from everyone to say, if you're looking at the questions where they've asked, what do you intend to change when you return back to your practice? And then 90 days later, how many of your learners have truly implemented what they said they were going to implement, change at their practice? Do you guys have that data? Is there any data to say, okay, since I've attended a course, again, going back to my first comment, is it really more so you're attending a program to maintain your licensure? Is it more so I really want to be a specialist in my area? All of that, plays into my decision. But at the same time, that also plays into the decision of a learner choosing a certain live event to attend versus an enduring program, because learners are becoming very choosy about what live events do I really truly attend at the end of the day, because of travel expenses, even their patient care, like, can be impacted from their absence from their practice, really.
Yeah.
Outcomes does play a major role when you're looking at supporting a program to say, is it really going to give me the outcomes that I'm looking at or I'm looking for, to share with internal stakeholders to say this is really a very powerful program to support, because not only are we, educating clinicians and we're changing practice and we're improving care through education, but it's making a big difference in how this learner truly applies what they truly learn. And it's not just information overload, but they're truly getting the education. They're actually able to retain it, and they're actually able to see the outcomes of their patients.
Well, and I hear you. And as producers of long-term programs, we really have to. We actually do get more data than a shorter program, but it's really our job to distill that data and present it in a clear way. And that's why we're so lucky to have Kim here, who is such an expert, has helped us and just tons of the CME community to evaluate properly. And are we asking the right questions? And how are we assessing the value and such? So Kim, make sense of all this for us so that we
makes sense. Thanks, Tim. I always say I'm the token nurse when I get on panels like this. We all, in all professions, have had long history of having conferences that go over multiple days, right? And I know that a lot of the points we've brought up today on this panel and previous sessions today has been about outcomes. We need to measure outcomes. We need to measure outcomes. We need to measure value of why we're doing what we're doing. No matter what the education is, whether it's going to be a short 1 hour or it's going to be a long multi-day or even a 4-hour program workshop, I think that Arnie, you brought back, and Amina, you brought back also two key things. Why are you doing the education in the first place? So what's the need? What is that need? And if it's complex, if it's a lot of application that needs to be done, if it's late breaking sciences, then we may need to look at longer than just a 1-hour snippet of education. Look at your target audience. If you're asking a bunch of practitioners to come to multi-days, then asking them to come on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is going to be out of context. They're not going to be able to walk away from any practice for those days. So you make them closer on the weekend. Yeah. So those are some things but really why are you doing the education? How much does your learner need to know? And notice I didn't say participant or attendees. I'm saying learner. You want them to walk away with some sort of outcome. And agreed, across the board, we need outcome. Arnie and Amina, you both mentioned that it's important when you're doing longer days, longer sessions, that you're doing almost this formative evaluation, this formative measuring of outcomes. What we do a really poor job of is capturing those outcomes. So as you're going from session to session, start gathering some data of, is this useful information? One of the great places to do this is to go to have a poster session or a networking session where you're starting to gather some of the conversations that are being brought up. What sessions are being brought up more? How are they going to apply the content? And then capture that data, not only to maybe inform the remaining of the education since it's multi-day, but say, hey, by the way, this has already been talked about. Can you bring up some of the questions that they're having? But capture that. Hey, I'm going to be able to take this back to my job and put it into place right away. Or I need to tell my team, my healthcare team, that we learned this late breaking trial and how can this impact our practice. So those are some things that, going back, I know outcomes are really important, but it's the why. It's that assessment of what are we doing? How much time do we need? And then another thing that I think is really important that has been brought up, I love that you mentioned coffee. Rooms are always cold. I've worked with nurses for 20 years, and you will always, always, always get that the room is cold, no matter what. Coffee's great. That's an awesome thing to do. Physical breaks are required. So many times I've gotten an agenda and you have people sitting or is sitting in one room, which is even worse, for 4 hours straight. Nobody's going to learn 4 hours straight. Now, unless you were binging the Game of Thrones season weekend, you had some entertainment. You had something that was engaging you. You needed to see, but you still had to pause and use some physical time away from the TV. So does your learner. Your learner has to have that. So that's kind of my pet peeve there. You mentioned measuring learner engagement is difficult. How many times have you been at a session and you notice traffic, especially if there's multiple sessions, and longer activities usually do have multiple sessions, but you notice the traffic going in and out of a room. If you have a room that the people are sitting in the seats the whole entire time and nobody's leaving, then that's an engaged session. They're getting something out of that, probably. But if you start off with 50 people in the session and about 20 people leave throughout that, something's missing. They're not wanting to stay and listen. And then use the panels is a really popular thing to do right now, which is great. I love the debate session, especially if you can get people on polar opposites of a topic. That is really good. It can engage. People use gaming a lot in this too. That's a great engagement. It's still getting content. You still can get learner outcomes from that. But if you just have the person who published everything on the topic up on the stage talking for an hour, nobody's going to take much from that other than, hey, I got to see somebody talking. So I'm going to turn it over to Derek, I guess, if you have any questions or if the panel has anything else they want to add.
Well, thank you, Kim. That did bring a lot together. Derek, let me take a minute. Is there anything?
Yes, we had one or two questions. We have about 3 minutes to go. So I'm going to give, you pretty much covered most of the questions that came in. One for Lynn. Fairly, I don't think it's too difficult of a question for you. But someone was asking about how do other stakeholders within your organization view these types of long-term courses? I think they're referring to like medical affairs, however, others that you may have to be on your grant review committees. I'm not, quite sure how you do your grant reviews, but do they support them? Are they interested, or are they more interested in sort of short-term internet activities? I guess there's just an interest in that.
Honestly speaking, it really just comes down to the quality of the program. Like if it's a program that really is not just only about the target audience or the number of learners, but if it's really a very good, robust program that's hitting a gap that we've identified, then whether it's enduring or live, the GRC is usually favorable to supporting such a program. And especially me being an advocate to say, this is a really good program. We're going to touch X, Y, and Z. I'm really raising the points of why we want to support that program. But at the same time, many of my GRC members are also people who have practiced in the field. And they do take into consideration, really, I'm not going to, or do you really think a learner who's really in the space of, like I'm gonna just say derms, are they really going to take 5 days away from here? I can envision them being here for maybe 3 days, but I don't know about 5 days, and that's where I have to really go back and look at the program, look at the needs assessment, look at the outcomes of what they've done in the past, and even understand what can they say or what have they done to say this is one that we should really move forward with supporting. So I can't tell you it's a one size fit all. For my GRC members, but it really comes down to, is it a very good, program that hits a mark or a gap that we've identified in our company or within the education or within the practice space that really would determine whether we want to support it if it's alive or enduring or 4 days versus 1 day. I personally am thinking about the learners. Again, the audience, the learning lifestyles, really adult learning principles is more of a snack series, really the best approach for some learners versus, longer 5 day, 3 days. Those are the things I do think about before presenting to the GRC at the same time, letting them all come together to decide on what we want to support. I hope that answered their questions too.
Yeah, no, that was great. That was great. And we're at 12:55. So Tim, I'll turn it over to you if you have any final words, and then I'll close it out.
Yeah, well, basically, I want to thank our team for their varied presentations. I hope that this was useful. I hope that it allows you to, all the CME Palooza participants, to take a step back and look at, where would longer term CME be of value, and how else could it differ and be measured differently from shorter CME. I also want to thank you and Scott for inviting us, and I think that wraps it up for us today. And thank you again.
Great.
You.
I want to thank all of the panelists for participating. This was a great session, a lot of good information. And if I could, on just a personal note, really quickly, it's been an honor and a privilege to have Arnie Meyer on this session, who, when I started out in the CME world way back in 2000, worked at Thomas Jefferson University, and Temple and TJU did a lot of work together. And Arnie is one of the first people who I learned a lot about this world from, and perhaps maybe the first friend that I made within the industry outside of my organization. So it's been a pleasure to have you on, Arnie. Thanks for agreeing to participate.
Thanks, Derek.
Sure. So lastly, if you could take our survey, if you're watching this at some point during the day, it's only 7 questions. It'll take you 30 seconds to complete. There's a link on the live page. You can click on it just one time. You don't have to take it every time you watch a session. One time would be great, but your feedback is valuable to us. We do use it quite a bit, actually. And then next, in order to view the next session, which is our 1 p.m. session, which is, I need to look it up, Lighten the Load, Designing Efficient, Engaging Education Based on Cognitive Principles. With Karen Roy and Christine Considine, who are both way smarter than I am. So you should definitely tune in for that session. All you need to do is refresh your screen once this is over, and it'll start at the top of the hour. And with that, I think that's it. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you all later on.
Thank you.
Thank you.